Welcome to The Investigators. I'm investigative reporter Vanessa Murphy at KLAS TV in Las Vegas, joined by my colleague here.
Hello, Vanessa. Kyle Payne. Nice to see you. We have a big one today.
We do. This marks around 2 years from a tragic shooting inside a Las Vegas law office. This was a meeting, also known as a deposition, about child custody. You had both sides. You had attorneys for both sides, family members related to the child custody. So that's unusual, Kyle. Let's take a look.
We believe the suspect is deceased. We do have 2 deceased victims on scene, and there is no further threat to the community.
He called and told us that he was in a locked room and that he could hear an active shooter in the building, and that the police had just arrived when he initially called us.
Can you cover it? I'm getting my rifle. Okay, please hang out in the parking garage for us, okay?
Well,
even as someone who covered that story the day this happened, it gives me chills to see that.
well, look, the police video is, we're going to see a little bit more of it later. The rifle, that is obviously not standard procedure for law, for a deposition, for anything. And so, you know, it was hectic. It was violent. And like you said, one of the really hard parts to get over in this story, as we'll examine, is that pretty much everybody in the room, with 2 exceptions, were related to each other one way or another through marriage or blood. And that's why this story caught our attention, not only in the day of the violent shooting,
right,
but like for basically the rest of the year and into 2025. And now that we're at 2 years, it's a good chance to look back. And, I think when we do some of these, we talk about peeling back to let our viewers see how things work and how we do what we do in what are very challenging circumstances.
Yes, and this was a challenge in explaining because of the dynamics.
Yes.
And we sort of settled on a graphic to show who the parties were.
Right.
But just to go over it quickly,
Okay.
Kyle, you had 2 sides. So you have mom and dad dealing with their child custody dispute. They're no longer together. So dad is Dylan Houston. Then you have mom, Ashley Prince.
Right. They
Ashley
are newly married.
Is with her new partner.
Right.
Dennis Prince, they are at his law office and he is representing her in that case. Dylan, the dad, is represented by his father, who's an attorney, Joseph Houston. So you have mom with her new partner, who's a lawyer. You have dad with his father, who's a lawyer. And then you have some other parties in the room.
If I may. So Kelly Houston then is Joe's wife. It was Kelly's deposition because the grandparents were involved in this custody battle. So Joe Houston's there representing Dylan Houston, his son. Lisa Rasmussen's an attorney. She's representing Kelly Houston. So you've got Dylan Houston on one side with his dad, Joe Houston, with his wife, Kelly Houston, with her attorney. And then on the other side, newlyweds. You don't usually see all of this, I'll call it nepotism, I don't know, blood relation.
Interpersonal relationships.
It was crazy. And I think as this case progresses, and it's not over, you're going to hear more about how maybe some of this was a little too close for comfort. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I'm glad you explained that. And then what happens is Joe Houston, the father who's the lawyer, the grandfather to the kids involved, takes out a gun and shoots mom and her new partner, lawyer Dennis Prince, then turns the gun on himself. It gives me chills to say it even 2 years later because this was just tragic. And you have kids now who have lost their parents.
Right. And, we have a couple million people in our viewing area, but it's a small city, Las Vegas, in a lot of ways. And some of the people here know some of the people
Yes.
involved in that. I certainly do. And it's when you stop to think about the sensationalness of it all and how it's real people in the most horrifying scenario, that's why I think we're talking about it today.
Right. And there were questions of why did this happen in the office? But that's standard. These
Sure.
depositions happen. And then why were the attorneys so close to the actual parties involved? There was just so much going on, and we tried to piece it together. And Kyle, I remember that day in the newsroom when we hear active shooter on the scanner, it is all hands on deck. It is all hands on deck. We know this, unfortunately, from 1 October. At the time, we knew this, unfortunately, from the UNLV shooting. And then we hear this active shooter. It's all hands on deck. You have multiple reporters and photographers rushing to the scene to figure out what is happening. We knew that they were evacuating an office building. And then you have myself, like David Charnes, other reporters texting our sources to try to piece this together and figure out what happened, what is happening, and what will happen. And I know we have
Right. So as our reporting process continued through the days and weeks, we can plug in some of what happened that day by using body camera and 911 video. And we are going to start with those 911 tapes, which are chilling.
So the shooting was in the conference room?
Yes.
Did you hear how many shots?
I don't know, probably like 10. Oh my God. I think I know what happened. I think I know what was going on in the deposition. I think the person's last name is Houston. It's an attorney in town. I think it was a family law deposition.
Do you know if he's an employee there?
It's Joe. Joe killed him? Joseph Houston. He's older gentleman.
Okay, Joseph Houston?
Yes.
So we heard that body camera. You can hear people are hushed and they're fearing for their lives. Obviously, they heard loud noises. They know they were pretty good telling the police what had happened, and a lot of that turned out to be the case. And then the police got there, and this is what that looked like.
Hey, you covering? I'm getting my rifle. Come on out. Okay. Is there somebody out here meeting them, or are we just? No. Okay, please hang out in the parking garage for us, okay?
I believe when police got there, they weren't sure exactly what was going on. They had to clear the floors. There's video of them going down in the elevator. And when we come back, we'll hear a firsthand account of that day and sort out what's gone on in the 2 years since. Stay with us.
Welcome back to The Investigators. We are digging into a tragic shooting inside a law office here in Las Vegas, which happened 2 years ago. This story isn't over. There are still new developments, but at the time, shortly after this happened, of course, we reach out to sources. We try to reach out to the parties involved, see who wants to talk with us. And David Charnes ended up talking with someone, Kyle, who was in that room. And also has a role 2 years later in shedding light on some of what may have happened. But this is a good account of what it was like in those moments in that room.
It was unusual in the sense that there was no pleasantry.
That's how attorney Lisa Rasmussen remembers the morning of April 8th, when she went to the Prince Law Group for a deposition in the custody battle between Dylan Houston and his ex-wife Ashley. Rasmussen was representing Dylan Houston's mother, Catherine Kelly Houston, and was sitting next to her at the table. Next to Rasmussen on the other side, Kelly's husband, Joe Houston, who was representing their son, Dylan.
It was very tense. I already knew it was going to be tense, but it was more tense than I would have anticipated.
On the other side of the table, Dennis Prince representing his wife Ashley and another attorney in his firm next to her. Rasmussen says the deposition started with little fanfare.
Joe then said to Dennis, before we start, is there any hope that we can resolve any of the issues for the sake of the kids? And Dennis didn't respond at all. He didn't even acknowledge the question. There was just nothing. Instead, he turned to Kelly and started asking the deposition questions.
A few minutes later, it's not what Rasmussen remembers seeing, it's what she heard.
He'd asked, I don't know, maybe 3 questions. And then there was just this horrible noise. I turned and I saw on my right side a barrel, just a barrel, and a sleeve of like a dress sleeve. Then I saw him stand up and point very decidedly a gun across the table, and then it was clear to me what was happening, and that noise was a gunshot, and that was a gun, and that he was pointing a gun.
Rasmussen then ran out of the conference room with her client, finding a hiding spot in a nearby office and relaying what had happened to 911. For hours, they didn't know anyone had died in the shooting, nor that Joe Houston had shot himself. But there was this sign.
I was painfully aware that there were like 8 ambulances lined up on the street outside, and none of them ever came in, and none of them ever left.
Do you think he came to that deposition with the intent to kill them?
Well, that's the question, right? I don't know, but I don't know that we'll ever know, but I do know some things wouldn't make sense if that was his plan.
Rasmussen says that's because Joe Houston asked Dennis Prince to not bring Ashley Prince to the hearing. And when she and the Houstons arrived to the office together, they wanted to sit on the other side of the table.
Dennis walked by and opened the door and said, oh, no, I sit on that side. You need to move to the other side. He said, I don't want my back to the door.
Well, Rasmussen doesn't know why Joe Houston did it. She does know the custody case that brought everybody together last Monday had boiled for years. She says the family court failed everybody, noting a child custody evaluation ordered 2 years ago is still not complete.
There's an inefficiency in the family court that allowed this to linger for this period of time, to fester.
Rasmussen walked away with her life and now a week later is playing what happened over and over in her head, though deep down she knows all she could do was run.
I was in no position to stop him or say, Joe, put the gun down, or to tackle him or to knock the gun out of, I just, that to me was not an option. But my instinct was flight.
And we certainly appreciate Lisa sharing her story with us. Certainly not easy to talk about, and something she must think about every day, Kyle.
She does, and I think it's fair to say our hearts go out to the people that were in that room, and the courage that it comes to go on television and talk about it without crying, or and being able to keep a certain composure. But 2 years have passed, and there's a 2-year statute of limitations on suing, and Lisa is suing. There are a lot of people suing, in fact. The Ashley Prince's family, the Pages, they're suing Joe Houston's estate and Kelly Houston, Joe's wife. The court reporter inside is suing Joe Houston. This is the person who would take the stenography of what was going on in the deposition. And we learned that there were only a few questions asked before the gunfire erupted. And then Lisa is suing. Now, what's interesting is Lisa, if you're picking sides, was on the Houston side of the table. She was representing Kelly Houston. So she is not suing the Houstons. And she's suing the Dennis Prince's estate and Dennis Prince's law firm, saying that Dennis knew how contentious it was getting and had a duty to let people know that this is getting ugly and you might be in danger. Okay. And then she's also suing the law firm, saying, well, even though Dennis was in charge of the law firm, you have a responsibility to take that guy off the case if he's getting too personally involved. And where Joe is representing his own son and Dennis is representing his new wife, you can say it's not a hard thing to figure out that where emotions get involved, as in other cases they might not.
Yeah, I think anyone would agree that this was, we mentioned earlier, especially unusual when the attorneys are family members.
Right. Yes.
And it's a new husband.
Right. And then just to make the web even bigger, one of Dennis Prince's ex-wives is Judge Nancy Bernstein, who sits in Las Vegas Justice Court. We've done stories with her. She and Dennis shared a child. And on behalf of her child, she sued Dennis Prince and the law firm, and I believe the Houstons, to all of them, saying, you all could have avoided this. You all owe my son, some... Well, it's always, in these cases, unfortunately, justice is money. That's how it's calculated. So you owe my son some justice, aka some money, and all of those lawsuits got wrapped up to the point where now they're filed by 2 days. We're recording this on the 10th of April. On the 8th, on the 2-year anniversary, it was due. Those lawsuits were due, and that's a part of the reason that we chose to do this today. One of the things that some of the people suing are saying is that maybe Kelly Houston and Dylan knew that Joe might do this.
We're talking about grandma and paternal grandma and father.
Right. But I think it's important to show that regardless of whatever you might think, Metro investigated this and they arrested no one. I think that they determined that Joe Houston was solely responsible. So there's a lot to say of people saying that in these lawsuits that Kelly and the family may have known or should have known, and Metro has not come forward with anything along those lines.
Kyle, one thing I want to ask you, since you are covering the latest with the lawsuit, there were rumors that Joe Houston perhaps had brain cancer and knew that he was dying and this is how he was going out. But I didn't confirm that independently. Have you with your sources?
No, I've never confirmed that. I think there was... he was an older man, and who knows what his medical status was. And I'm sure the family has heard that rumor too, but no one has come forward and said that. And I don't know that we'll ever get to prove anything like that. But when we come back, we're going to talk about this custody case because it got a little bit heated, and how we handle some of these stories as they go down that road as well when we come back. Stay with us.
Welcome back to The Investigators. We are taking a look at a shooting inside a law office 2 years ago here in Las Vegas. At the center of this, child custody, Kyle.
Ultimately, these two got divorced, and at issue was who's going to take the kids on what days or how often and what's the deal. And a lot of people, divorced parents who are co-parenting that weren't necessarily ever married, deal with this stuff. But like we said, emotions got so involved here that tensions escalated, and that actually became part of your reporting.
It did, and I think, I don't know if the right word is shocking, but a part of this was Ashley Prince, a victim who was shot and killed in this shooting, was considering getting security for this.
Which is hard to wrap your head around, because if they had, and there are, I would say the average custody case does not have an armed guard in it. So just thinking about that possibility should give you some context of how ugly this got. But your story outlines that.
Let's take a look.
A few big updates here. We've learned Ashley Prince initially planned to have security at that child custody deposition, but then canceled it. We've also learned her ex-husband sent a disturbing email to her new husband after a private investigator followed him and submitted a report which could have possibly hurt him in his court battle for his kids. Ashley Prince texting private investigator Hal DeBecker, "Do you have any private security you recommend? And I would just feel better," referring to a child custody deposition Monday morning at 10 and stating Dylan has a ton of guns at that house. Dylan Houston, her ex-husband. But on Thursday, Prince canceled security. Nothing Monday, he will not be there. While we've learned Dylan wasn't at that deposition, his father, Joe Houston, was, who turned out to be the danger, killing Ashley and her new husband and attorney, Dennis Prince, before turning the gun on himself. Ashley and Dylan's custody battle involved their 2 young children. The 8 News Now investigators reviewing a report regarding surveillance of Dylan. According to DeBecker Investigations, on March 29th, Dylan Houston was observed excessively drinking at a Summerlin bar at 5 p.m. 5 drinks with 3 shots each are reported between about 4 hours. A friend tried stopping Dylan from driving, but he got behind the wheel and swerved on the road. The Princes and the Houstons received the report. The 8 News Now investigators reviewed an email from Dylan Houston sent to Dennis Prince at 1:30 in the morning on April 4th. This was 4 days before the tragic shooting. He appears to refer to that investigative report about his drinking and asks, "All you have is this?" The email ends with a laughing emoji, and he states, "You have no idea what's coming, do you? All your cards are on the table, and I haven't played one." We've also learned there was an event this coming Friday Ashley Prince was concerned about. She planned on having security in case Dylan Houston was there. Her concern clearly was Dylan, her ex-husband, not her ex-father-in-law, Joe Houston, who again we've learned is the one who opened fire. Vanessa Murphy, 8 News Now.
Ugly and tragic, Kyle.
Right. And I think you did that story only a few days after the original shooting, which is incredible to think that we were able to find out all that personal information about how terrible it was. And it helps put things into context. But then because of our interest and how violent an episode it was, we ended up doing something we don't usually do, which is actually covering custody hearings. And I went to court, and it was long, and the Pages were there. Ashley's family was there, and they wanted custody. They were very anti Dylan Houston, and Dylan was trying to defend himself. There were lawyers there. I believe also one of our media colleagues had an attorney there trying to get access to the full record. It was a circus. And I remember I left there, and I was just an observer. I felt abused having sat through like 2 or 3 hours of that. And I went and I did a live shot saying, because I did some divorce in my private life as an attorney before I came to Channel 8. And it was always terrible because people's emotions are so high. They hate each other sometimes. And that's not an exaggeration. And I vowed at that point not to cover that custody case again. And I don't know that I'm ever going to cover another one to begin with.
I think, as you mentioned, typically we try to stay away from covering child custody cases. It's often a he said, she said. There's a child at the center of it. It's private. But there are some unusual cases, as you mentioned, like this one, where we did need to see what was going on as a follow-up to the shooting.
Right. And I think I was curious personally for my own reporting to know, are they going to reveal details in this custody hearing about this shooting that we were so absorbed with? And it turned out perhaps not, except one of the lawyers did try to make the assertion that maybe the Houstons knew. And again, that was perhaps unfounded, but it's war. That's the only way to describe it. In that family law courtroom, sometimes it's war, and they will use whatever they can against each other. And that's why to try and use the media in a typical custody battle, we don't want to air people's dirty laundry in that regard. That's why we wait for someone to, let's say, get arrested, get sued. Now someone else is chronicling it for us, and we can cover it in a more objective fashion, as opposed to people saying, she's a liar, he's a liar. Oh my gosh, I can't.
Right. There's always going to be exceptions, but typically I get emails, I get DMs. police cover this, and generally we try to stay away from it.
Well, and I think also, not just with custody, but whenever a story is he said, she said, and you're not going to get an answer, we're not doing the viewers any justice. But speaking of giving the viewers justice, we'll continue to follow this case. It's not over. Certainly the legal battles will persist, and I'm sure details will come out as the time goes on. So,
thanks for watching.